Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to part 2 season 1 of What If Deku Was in Viltrumite. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. So, we begin. The next day Izuku woke up extremely early to a loud knocking on his door. It was his father, standing there to announce the beginning of his training. The green-haired boy dragged himself out of bed and got ready before meeting his father outside. Well, you look tired, Nolan said, quite comically. Izuku yawned in response, before saying, I barely got a wink last night. I guess I was too excited for today. Nolan giggled upon hearing this, before continuing by saying, all right, we shouldn't waste any more time then. Let's take to the sky. Izuku was confused upon hearing this, but he didn't get to think anything else before Nolan grabbed him and started flying. The green-haired boy began to panic slightly as he looked towards his father and asked, what are you doing? With terror being prominent in his voice as he spoke, Nolan wore a passive smile as he suddenly stopped in the air and said, try to not look down, before suddenly letting go of his son. Izuku began to scream in panic. As he began to fall, he went as far as to close his eyes. But his moment of terror quickly ceased. The green-haired boy slowly opened his eyes, only to be shocked and confused. He was floating, without doing anything. Flying is almost like a reflex. If you don't want to fall, you won't fall, Nolan said, breaking Izuku out of his state of shock. The green-haired boy slowly steadied his breathing, before looking straight down and saying, that's cool, and a little terrifying, with a somewhat trembling voice, showing that he still was a little afraid. Nolan didn't change his expression, as he responded by saying, you'll get used to it, eventually, with the same voice, before proceeding by saying, learning how to fly is like learning how to walk. You don't think about balancing yourself while walking anymore, but you did when you were a baby. Sounding as clear as he could, Izuku understood what he meant, and commented by saying, so, I'm basically taking my first steps all over again. As he proceeded to float in circles around his father, Nolan nodded towards this, as he said, exactly. So you need to focus on staying upright and focus on the direction you want to go. While his eyes followed Izuku, the green-haired boy tested this, focusing harder on the direction that he wanted to go. Eventually he got the hang of it, and could somewhat control his flying. Nolan was surprised by this progress, as he smiled and said, that's good, follow me. Before taking off, Izuku was caught off guard, but regained his senses before flying after his father. Eventually he caught up to him, both now flying at the same pace. You can wear yourself out by flying. Moving fast is like tensing a muscle, so you're better off relaxing that muscle from time to time. Use the momentum you're building to carry you forward. Of course you don't want to fall, so relaxing will prove rather difficult in the beginning, Nolan then said, talking casually while flying. Izuku was deep in focus while trying to keep up with the speed, but he somehow managed to respond to his father. So I basically have to fight against my instincts and lifelong disciplines to let go and relax while flying, he said, his voice sounding like he was in a lot of physical strain. Nolan was once again surprised, as he said, yeah, that's one way to put it. You catch on pretty quickly. Try to land over there. While pointing towards a clearing in the woods, Izuku flew towards that spot, only to realize that he was descending at rapid speeds and didn't know how to slow down. After a few seconds he crashed into the ground, leaving a large crater underneath him. Well, I guess you could call that a landing, Nolan then said. As he slowly descended towards the ground, Izuku dragged himself up to his feet, wincing slightly as he dusted himself off and said, that hurt, but not nearly as much as I imagined that it would. With a voice that showed a slight hint of shock, Nolan held a normal expression, as he said, that's good. Just don't get too used to it. Now, try to hit me. With a calm voice, Izuku looked a little shocked and confused, as he asked, are you serious? Nolan just smiled and giggled, as he answered by saying, yes, I'm serious. Izuku was once again shocked, but he didn't let it affect him too much before he threw a punch towards his father. Nolan easily dodged it, as he looked at his son and said, use your whole body. You can punch with your arm, but if you punch with your shoulder, your hips and your legs as well, it will be more powerful. With the same calm voice, Izuku nodded to this and tried a couple of times, only to find that it was far more difficult than he imagined at first. It will take a while to get the hang of it, Nolan then said, getting his son's attention. Izuku stopped punching and listened to what his father said next. We can freely move ourselves through physical space. That's how we fly, so we don't have to push off the ground. We can push off anything. We can literally create our own leverage, Nolan said, as he demonstrated by floating up and down. Izuku was stunned to hear this. At first he didn't realize just how useful and flexible flight was. But now he did. If he could create his own leverage so easily, it meant that he could continuously attack or evade, regardless of what position he found himself in. The green-haired boy then closed his eyes and started to concentrate. After that, he started to float. That is when he opened his eyes and proceeded to throw another set of punches towards his father. Nolan easily avoided the punches once again, as he smiled while saying, "That's good, but try a little more like this." With his usual voice, Izuku was once again confused and asked, like why, but was cut off by Nolan, who threw a powerful blow straight into his chest. Izuku had the wind knocked out of him as he fell to the ground in pain. He wanted to speak, but the punch had hit him so hard that he couldn't bring a single word out of his throat. Nolan's expression suddenly changed into one of concern. Watching how his son now struggled to breathe, he made his way down to Izuku, before placing his hand on his shoulder and saying, "I'm sorry, Izuku. I didn't mean to hit you so hard, but you have to be prepared for anything. If you really want to do what I do, you have to endure the pain, because no one is going to pull their punches." With a voice that showed concern, Izuku continued to wince and gasp for air. He wanted to say something, comment or complain about how much it hurt, but he couldn't. It wasn't just that he was physically unable to do so. His father was right. If he wants to be a hero, he has to be able to take a punch, because no one will ever go easy on him. The green-haired boy clenched his teeth, biting through the pain as he slowly pulled himself up. His legs trembled horribly, but he didn't give in. He kept pulling himself up until he was finally back on his feet again. "I'm not done yet," Izuku exclaimed, barely able to speak still. Nolan was more shocked than ever before. He had held back with that punch, but the force was still enough to deal damage. If that wasn't enough, it landed in the center of his chest. The impact would make it difficult to breathe. Despite all of this, Izuku still stood up. It made him happy, because it meant that Izuku actually had what it took to do this. Nolan smiled as he walked up to Izuku and said, "All right, take a deep breath and then we'll continue." With a voice that showed just how proud he was, Izuku did as his father said. He took a deep breath before smiling and saying, "I'm ready." With a more steady voice, Izuku spent the next 10 months training with his father. Eventually, he learned how to fly with barely any problem, and how to use his powers in some creative ways. Nolan was impressed by how much Izuku managed to improve, and had to up the training to what other people would call bizarre levels. It was during one of their flight sessions that Izuku noticed something strange. He noticed a beach that looked more like a scrapyard, but there was something else about it. He could see 2 figures there, both looking to be blonde, and he could hear what sounded like an explosion. This explosion made Izuku realize that one of the blondes had to be Bakugo, and upon closer inspection he realized that the other was none other than a deflated All Might. The green-haired boy was both shocked and confused. Bakugo looked like he was being trained by All Might. But what did that mean? Did it mean that Bakugo knew his secret? How do they even know each other? And for what purpose was Bakugo being trained? All of these questions pondered inside of Izuku's head, but he didn't get to think too much about it before having to return to his training. Then, before he even knew it, the day of the entrance exam had finally arrived. Izuku walked his way through the gates of UA, only feeling a little nervous about what's to come. He was sure that he could pass with his abilities, but he was mostly thinking about what his father told him before leaving. Nolan had told his son to be careful and try to hold back when using his powers. He could easily pass the exam without any trouble, but he could destroy the entire test site just as easily. Not only that, he could accidentally hurt someone if he wasn't cautious enough. This would be Izuku's real test, to use his powers while causing a minimal amount of damage to his surroundings. That includes limiting how fast he flies and how hard he hits. He is a Viltrumite, so it's his responsibility to use his powers sparingly. "Out of my way, Deku," a loud and aggressive voice shouted. Izuku turned to see that it was Bakugo, walking his way towards him. The green-haired boy sighed before saying, "Hey Kaken," while waiting for something nasty to come out of Bakugo's mouth. To his surprise, however, that didn't happen. The blonde just looked grumpy as he walked past Izuku without uttering a word. The green-haired boy was confused as his eyes followed the back of Bakugo. The blonde had, for some odd reason, been less aggressive towards him recently. He didn't know why Bakugo suddenly changed his behavior, but he could guess that it had something to do with the sludge villain incident. Maybe it had something to do with All Might. Izuku stopped thinking about it the second that it came to his mind, because he knew that it would only serve to distract him. He shoved all those thoughts out of his head before proceeding towards the auditorium. The exam's explanation was simple. In order to earn points, you had to destroy robots. Different robots give different amounts of points. Then there was a robot worth 0 points. But it was practically impossible to beat. One part of Izuku wanted to make Present Mike eat his words about the 0-pointer, but decided against it when remembering what his father had told him. The green-haired boy stood outside the gates to the fake city, preparing himself mentally. To everyone else he looked calm and stoic, but on the inside he was desperately trying to calm himself down. That is when he finally cleared his head and stood ready by floating ever so slightly. Then, without warning, the gates flung open. Izuku didn't waste any time and immediately flew off at high speed. The other examinees looked confused, until Present Mike shouted that the test had already started and that there were no countdowns in real battles. They all took haste, but they were slightly distracted. It was the fact that the green-haired boy, who previously had been in the far back, had flown over their heads at super speeds. Even a certain blue-haired teen had been impressed by the speed, feeling like he himself was outclassed. Izuku wasted no time and immediately went for his first set of robots. He immediately flew up to them and started to dismantle them, making sure to keep surrounding damage to a minimum before heading for a new batch. The green-haired boy continued like this, flying around and destroying as many robots as he could see. At some point he even started to help other examinees that he thought were in danger. Meanwhile, in the monitor room, the many teachers were observing the exam. They carefully inspected the examinees and even began picking favorites. Then their gazes landed on the monitor that showed a certain green-haired boy. They watched him fly around, destroying robots in his way. But they felt something strange from him. He looked careful without any reason, and he didn't look that impressive. Other than the fact that he was strong and could fly, he didn't look that special. Many of the teachers had this mutual feeling, except for a select few. Among those was a certain blonde hero, and he could immediately see what was happening. He could tell that the green-haired boy was holding back in an effort to minimize damage. But that didn't help him. He wanted to know just how strong this kid was, and where his limits lay, because if he's anything like his father, he is nothing short of incredible. The exam went on, and Izuku felt that it was almost too easy. Maybe it was the fact that he was really strong, and that he had trained with Omni-Man for 10 months. But it still felt too easy. The only thing that was challenging was to fight without destroying everything. But that wasn't too much of a problem. Izuku's thoughts were answered. However, as he could hear some rumbling from behind him, he turned around and saw that it was the 0-pointer, making its destructive way through the fake city. The green-haired boy could see the other examinees run away from below, and he was about to follow them, until he could hear a cry for help. He turned towards it and saw that a brown-haired girl had been trapped underneath some rubble. Izuku was a little annoyed upon witnessing this, because no one tried to help her. If he could hear it when he was up in the air, it meant that the others could also hear it. So why was no one trying to help her? The green-haired boy grew a little frustrated when thinking about this, but he stopped himself when seeing that the 0-pointer was getting close to crushing the girl. Izuku didn't waste any more time, as he flew towards the girl at high speed. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice showing concern. The girl grunted slightly, as she answered by saying, "No, I'm stuck," with a slightly panicked tone. The girl then panicked even more, as the 0-pointer closed in on them both. Izuku took haste, lifting the rubble away from the girl before picking her up and flying away from danger. That might have been too close for comfort. The green-haired boy then exclaimed, still holding the girl in his arms. The girl just looked at him and said, "Yeah, but better late than never, I guess," with a voice that sounded like it still had some fear in it. Izuku was about to ask himself if he should start attacking the 0-pointer. But just as he did so, he heard an announcement from the speakers saying that the exam was over. Both Izuku and the brown-haired girl breathed sighs of relief before looking at each other and feeling embarrassed about their situation. The green-haired boy quickly landed, his cheeks turning a little red as he asked, "See, can you stand?" with an embarrassed voice. The girl was also a little red, as she answered by saying, "No, I think I broke my ankle," with a voice that sounded like she was just as embarrassed as Izuku. "I think I can help with that," an old feminine voice then said. They turned to see that it was an old lady dressed in a nurse's outfit. Izuku recognized this to be Recovery Girl, which meant that the girl could be healed. Recovery Girl quickly healed the brown-haired girl with a kiss, before standing up on her own legs. She then looked at Izuku and said, "Thanks for saving me." With a smile on her face, Izuku smiled and blushed upon seeing this, as he responded by saying, "There's no need to thank me. I only did what any hero would do." With a somewhat calm voice, the girl just smiled more, making Izuku blush even more as he said, "I guess I'll see you around." Before leaving, unbeknownst to Izuku, someone was watching the exam from far away. It was none other than his father. Flying high enough to be unnoticed, he watched Izuku's performance throughout the exam. And he was pleased. He could tell that Izuku thought of just destroying the zero-pointer, but was glad to see him decide against it. He did as he was told and kept the damage to a minimum. And Nolan was more than satisfied with the results. A week passed after the entrance exam, and Izuku finally got his letter from UA. Without wasting any time, he tore it open, revealing a metallic disc. The disc then lit up, showing a hologram of All Might. It told him that he passed the exam, and that he got first place. The green-haired boy celebrated with both of his parents, receiving a lot of praise from his father. Then, just a week later, the day finally came. Izuku prepared himself properly before heading off to UA. Upon arriving, he looked for the door that read 1A, floating through the hallway as he did, until he finally found it. The green-haired boy stopped in front of the door, intimidated by how massive it was. He wondered just what type of people would be in his class, but he pushed that aside before steeling his nerves and sliding the door open. What he was met by on the other side was an argument between Bakugo and a blue-haired boy. Their argument quickly stopped, however, when they noticed that Izuku was standing in the doorway. Bakugo grunted and proceeded to ignore the green-haired boy, while the blue-haired boy walked up and introduced himself. "I'm Tenya Ida. It's nice to meet you," he said, as he reached out for a handshake. Izuku looked a little shocked, but he calmed himself before shaking Ida's hand and saying, "I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you too," with a slightly nervous voice. "Midoriya, you managed to see the true purpose of the exam. I must say that you are a far better student than I am." With a calm voice, Izuku was embarrassed after hearing this, but he didn't get the chance to explain himself before a familiar and feminine voice spoke up from behind him. "I know that green and messy hair," it said. Izuku turned around to see that it was the girl that he had saved during the entrance exam, which prompted him to turn a little red. "I'm Ochako Uraraka. Thank you for saving me," she then said. Izuku was still a little red, but he managed to calm down before saying, "I'm Izuku Midoriya. And you don't need to thank me." With a nervous tone, Uraraka didn't seem to notice how nervous Izuku was, as she proceeded to ramble with excitement. "So, what do you think we'll be doing today besides orientation? I wonder what the teachers are like. I can't wait to meet everybody. If you're here to make friends, I suggest that you pack your bags and leave," a tired and dull voice then said. Everyone looked behind Uraraka, only to be terrified when they saw a grumpy-looking man inside of a caterpillar-like sleeping bag. "My name is Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher," the man then said, as he proceeded to stand up and get out of his sleeping bag. Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. They just couldn't believe that this tired and worn-down-looking man was their teacher. Aizawa was unamused by everyone's reaction, as he pulled what looked to be a sports uniform out of his sleeping bag while saying, "Put these on and meet me in the training field." With a tired voice, everyone was confused, as Uraraka asked, "But sir, won't we miss orientation?" With what sounded like concern in her voice, the tired man looked just as unamused as before, as he answered by saying, "You all want to be heroes, right? Then we don't have time for orientation. Now do as I said, and don't make me wait." Without changing his voice in the slightest, everyone was once again stunned. Some were even intimidated, but they all listened this time. Everyone left the classroom to do what their teacher told them, unaware of what was in store for them all. Outro. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video. So goodbye and have a divine day.